the show. If you want to tell us who you are and what do you do?
So my name is Audrey Falconi, and I'm just now opening up a sports medicine clinic here in Las Vegas, Nevada.
What brought you to Las Vegas?
So this is actually home for me. I left about 15 years ago to go to college, joined the military, got to live in some pretty awesome places, and then recently finished up my active duty commitment, so decided to come home and spend some time with family.
What made you stay in Vegas as opposed to going somewhere else?
So like I said, I kind of got to travel all over the place. Hawaii, Colorado, Washington, California, and I don't know if I'm going to stay here long term, but it was kind of one of those things that I wanted to bring myself and my daughter back to spend some time with family and kind of get that time reestablishing those relationships for her while she's still young, and then see where life takes us.
So tell us about your military experience. What made you want to join, and then what did you do while you were in?
So I actually joined, nobody in my family was prior military, but I was recruited by a military college to play soccer. And so that was kind of like my first introduction to the military. And I really liked it. I liked not necessarily the rigidity, but I liked kind of your days kind of planned out. I really liked not having to think about what to wear, just wearing uniforms all day. And I didn't initially take the contract when I first started there because it was optional. But then when I found out I wanted to go to med school, and they offered a pretty a scholarship program that was really, really kind of good for medical school. They pay, and then you owe them 8 years afterwards. And so that kind of made my decision for me, and I ended up really loving it.
What made you want to go to med school?
So it was actually a moment I had. So I was a chemistry major, spent a lot of time in the lab, and I don't know if you guys know about titrating, if you did any of that in your careers. And there was one day where I was titrating, I don't know, for like hours, trying to create some co-crystals. And I just had like this epiphany, like, this is not what I want to do. Like, I'm miserable in this lab by myself. And I had a couple friends that were applying to med school at the time. So it was my junior year. And I had been taking a lot of bio classes as my electives. So I was pretty much already like in line. I only had a couple classes left to take the prerequisites, and kind of decided at that point, maybe I'll try med school. And it all worked out.
Let's paint the picture of titration too, because I feel like if you haven't been in a chemistry lab, you might not understand the joys of titrating something. So if you could tell us, like, what does that look like, and like explain a little bit more about what titration is.
So basically it's trying to get, you have to figure out how much time you want between each drop. And so let's say you want like 10 seconds per drop, and you have this vial kind of set up above another vial, and you're just slowly releasing. You have this little knob you have to turn. You turn the little knob. You have to make sure you only let out one drop, and it hits like the vial hopefully on the side so that it slides down slowly and doesn't like splash into the water. And so there's all these little like intricacies, and you know, if you go too fast, you've probably messed up your solution, but you won't know till the next day. And so it's a very tedious process.
That brought me back to chemistry lab and how I remember not enjoying that either. So
Yeah.
I love that we went back down that pathway.
Yeah.
So what made you want to go to med school as opposed to some other thing in the medical community? Was it just that's what other people were doing at the time, and it seemed like a good opportunity?
I don't know if I had like a really clear reason. I had kind of been like that thought had been floating through my head. Physical therapy, athletic training. I was playing soccer at the time, had some injuries in college, so I had some exposure to that. But I think the classes I really fell in love with in bio, like sports physiology, was one that I was able to take, and I really kind of enjoyed that more, I think. So I don't think I really understood what I was doing. I honestly don't think a lot of people who choose med school and medicine really understand what they're getting into. But it's one of those things that people are always like, oh, why don't you try med school, right? So I feel like I kind of fell into that decision, and then I was lucky in that it worked out for me, because I think there's a lot of people who've done it and maybe aren't that happy with their decision, but it's such a commitment, they stick with it.
I like the way that people say that too. Is like, why don't you try med school? Like, why don't you try this huge commitment that it's going to cost a lot of money, and you'll get a lot of free time too, right?
Yeah,
In
yeah,
med
it's
school?
it's really easy.
Yeah, okay. I figured it would be. So it's interesting you would start your career in the military. Do you think that would be much different if you would have started off on like the private practice side as opposed to having like the actual job in the military at the same time?
Sorry.
Like, do you have friends that worked in the private sector and you like compared experiences and saw how different that might have been?
So, not till residency. So I went to med school at a civilian med school, so I was able to kind of see what the civilian sector looked like for a little bit. I think the benefits you get from the military, especially family medicine, is that we have a much larger scope of practice. So I got to do a lot more procedure-based stuff that I know some of my family medicine counterparts didn't get to do. And then with all of the deployments and all of that training that comes with the military, every doctor has to learn trauma. And so I really liked that we got exposed to so many different things. It's what I actually liked about family medicine, is kind of having a broad scope. So I think in that sense, I preferred and was happy that I went that way. And then all of the more like coding and charting and all of that stuff too, I think was much simpler in the military. We aren't as like handcuffed by insurance companies. And so especially kind of how my practice has developed itself with some things that aren't covered with insurance, like PRP, I was able to do that stuff without having to hit a lot of roadblocks along the way.
Yeah, it's very interesting. Like even PTs in the military definitely have a different scope of practice, and sometimes it's actually a little bit better that way because you can do more things. And sometimes it actually trickles out on the civilian side. Like it starts off there, and then if it's good success and they're able to do whatever in your scope of practice, my understanding is that it might eventually translate to something else in the future, like the civilian side.
Yeah, I definitely saw that in Washington. I had 3 PTs that I was working with in the military that were able to do dry needling. And when I would meet PTs out in the civilian sector in Washington, it was like absolutely no, they can't touch it. And I thought it was pretty crazy because like they're you guys are way more trained in MSK, and you know doctors can pick up and do dry needling pretty easily, get it on their credentials, and it was like a absolute no there for PTs.
Yeah, the State Practice Act and lobbying for things does make a difference.
Yeah.
Especially on the West Coast for dry needling. I know that's I think now in all 3 states to touch the coast, right?
I'm not actually sure.
Maybe
I
so.
know California for sure. It's definitely a block there.
Mm-hmm. Well, tell us a little bit about your military experience as far as where you got to travel to and some of the things that they had you doing while you were going through residency.
Residency, actually, you're left alone. They want you to finish your training, so they won't pull you out to really do anything. And then as far as kind of our military training, they're a little more lenient with us when we're going through like our basic training, right? People call that our officer basic training for the medical field. Is they're just kind of making sure simple things, right? Like you know who you're supposed to salute, you know how to wear your uniform. They're like just getting us like feet wet, right? Because at that time you're really focusing